The whole idea of contracts is that they are not forever. So that somehow you can terminate a contract. And then the thing students always forget is that there's a natural end to a contract when both parties have performed. So don't forget that one. If the question is, list the ways how you can terminate a contract, or how a contract can come to an end. Termination implies sort of act. So think of the life cycle of a contract. Of an acceptance, performance, done. You know? Isn't it beautiful? When you export a container with iPhones, you put the iPhones in the container, you put it on a ship, it arrives, the customer pays, and your engagement is done. So that was not part of foreign direct investment. That was a one-off deal. And if the contract is, I will take a full plane with employees of General Electric, and I move to another country and I establish a plant and I start making refrigerators, then you have a sort of long-term contract. But even that one ends one day. Symbolized by that the ownership is transferred to someone else, or that you close the plant and the plane goes home with all the non-local employees. This is where you will negotiate on in the future. Because this is obviously sort of beneficial for one side or for the other side. You want to bargain on what's an appropriate deal. And you try to imagine all kinds of situations no party happens or hopes to happen in the category of what if. So what if the palm trees are so strong that we cannot cut them and that we cannot put a dam there? Then maybe we should call it a day together. And how do you do that? Who's then calling who? Who determines that the palm trees are uncuttable? Is that the local forester, or is that an international team of palm tree experts? Or so then you have to visualize who should then do what, and who should take which plane, and how long should it take? Are we happy if we take 5 years to determine whether the trees are uncuttable or not? And that is why the legal profession is a creative profession. Because you think of all these drama in the future that will never happen. And at the other end of the spectrum, so in half an hour when we discuss arbitration, you need imagination as an arbiter, ex post, to figure out how all on earth this drama in front of you could happen. How stupid could you be to sign this contract and this clause and do these stupid things and so forth. So on both sides of the spectrum you need creativity. Then, an important one, the applicable law and the dispute settlement. Applicable law, you have three options. One, let's more and more take the perspective of the foreign direct investor, because that is one of the main topics of the court. So option one is the law of the host country. So the Namteun case example, Laos law. In terms of Laos labor law, Laos commercial loan law, Laos construction law, Laos environmental law, Laos child labor law, Laos indigenous people law, and so forth. Option one. Option two is the applicable law, or not the applicable law, the law of the state of which the foreign direct investment is a corporate citizen. So French law for EDF, or Italian law for ITH, or Thailand law, or Dutch law, and so forth. Third option.
Sorry, the second option was the law of the investor.
The law of the investor.
Where is registered?
Where the headquarters are registered. And domiciled. That's an interesting, because in many projects the investor needs to create a local company. That's interesting. So where is then the investor? Well, around the corner. So then you end up in Laos again. And so that is why domicile is sort of issue. And third option is that you apply what you met in trade law, that you say, well, we apply the bilateral investment treaty and all kinds of other customary laws and lex mercatoria and other sort of sources of law we deem fit as arbiter. And where there are lacunae, so when there are holes in the laws, then you just look for some. That's the third option. And ultimately you have to decide. And in many contracts sort of hybrid. So where it comes to the principal obligations, you foreign direct investor in the state, and it is about you're kicked out or you're expropriated, then the international bilateral investment treaty law applies. And when it comes to a down-to-earth dispute, you dismiss a plant manager, then local labor laws apply. So it's sort of depending on the situation or on the subject matter. And that is obviously where there's a lot of case law by international arbitration institutions on the question, should it be local law or international? So there's a sort of body of law justifying masters in arbitration law and so forth. Since last year, you know that next to the applicable law, there is the question of who is deciding on the conflict, the jurisdiction. And again, three options: the local judge in Laos, the local judge in the home country, meaning that the state, so in our Nam-Teun case Laos, should take a plane to go to France to litigate against EDF in Paris. And that does it mean concrete? Third option, and that is the mostly chosen option, that is international arbitration, among others in the International Center for the Settlement of International Investment Disputes, based on the International Convention on the Settlement of Investment Disputes, ICSID. There are others, because that is a non-state phenomena. So you and I can establish this afternoon an arbitration institute. The applicable law includes the law made by the parties, also known as the contract. So that is another important thing I want you to continuously remember on contract law, that the clauses of the contract are legally binding words comparable to laws to the parties. Not to anybody else, but to the party. And if you make a contract of 1,000 pages, and in the ex-ante drafting phase you imagined all kinds of situations, then most likely your dispute is about one of those situations. So you open the contract and you see, what did we agree on step by step? Okay, then you should do this, then you should do that, then you should do this. And an arbitration, or an arbiter, has an easy job. You just need a few junior assistants who look at all those clauses, make little memoranda, like parties agreed to do exactly this and this and this in this situation. And then you say, well, the contract is binding, so let me see, here's your own recipe, please do it. End of story. So dispute settlement is not sort of rocket science, it's basically confirming contractual liability. So you confirm to pay this and this, fact is you did not pay, well, now you have to pay. It's not rocket science. Let's move to the Chad case in your law collection. And we look at the parties, consideration, main litigation term, termination, dispute settlement, and the applicable law. Let me show you a few pictures. This is the Chad case. So we have a country called Chad, landlocked, and we have a country, Cameroon. with a seaport. 2, you have oil in the territory of Chad. And you have oil refineries in Rotterdam, Houston, Shanghai, and you have huge oil tankers that travel the globe on a daily basis from harbors to refineries. Here you have an overview. The idea is, like with the hydroelectric dam, what if we start pumping the oil in Chad, for which you need a little pump. Then the problem is, how do we get the oil to the oil tankers? Option 1, with trucks. Option 2, with a pipeline. That's basically it, I believe. Downside of the pipeline is that it's sort of physical, tangible object that is sort of permanently somewhere, and that somewhere happens to be a neighboring country that is sovereign, and it's highly unlikely that you can contract with all the private owners of all these gardens that you need, which would take you 100 years to negotiate with them all. And secondly, in Cameroon and other states, there are rules on pipelines. And so you're not supposed to put a pipeline in your backyard without notifying the state. So the idea is, let's have those two states jointly operate this project, and they're all on this list of the International Development Association, one of the WBIs of loan eligible or IDA eligible countries, which is a euphemism for that is a developing country, poor. So the whole 9 yards of the package of the development is triggered. And here we see, and you can click on it and enlarge it at home. Here you see then the revenue plan, how the project ultimately triggers and fosters development. So here you have gross revenues to Chad, consisting of royalties, taxes, and dividends. Dividends, as in that Chad is part of the shareholders of the operator company. Taxes is that Chad can tax the company, profit tax and VAT and all kinds of other taxes. And royalties is a sort of equivalent of tax that there's a sort of fixed fee to be paid by the operating company to use the land and so on. And next to this Chad revenue flow, there's another one with the Cameroon revenue flow. And these are all kinds of drawings that are made in advance or ex ante to get all the stakeholders on board to participate. And here you see two arrows. One, the World Bank and the European Investment Bank debt service. Debt service means nothing less or more than that you service the debt, and that means that you repay the loan with interest. And then, next to the debt service, you have net revenues. So if you deduct from the gross revenues the debt financing part, then you have the net revenue. And then the net revenues are split 10%, 90%, 10% in a saving fund for future development, 90% in dedicated special accounts. And the income tax is going directly to the state. Then the dedicated special account, which is an arrangement that should be executed in Chad, is then 15% for 5 years. That covers operating costs of the state. 80% for 5 years and 100% after 5 years. And this is where the development pops in. Allocation for priority sectors. And 5% goes to the Doba region, which is sort of where actually the oil was pumped. That is the equivalent of the hydroelectric dam in Laos, the region where the lake was created. The people who were living there got a sort of special treatment because they needed to, because they had to be relocated. In the contract it says that Chad commits to priority sectors to use ultimately 100% of the revenues after 5 years. This project ultimately failed because in the contract it was not sharply enough articulated what the priority sectors were. And surprise, surprise, the democratic process of the dictatorship Chad decided that the arming of the local army and purchasing tanks and cannons and bombs was, according to Chad law, all of a sudden a priority sector, where on the basis of the Millennium Development Goal, Monterey, Doha, Busan, the association with priority sectors is schools, hospitals, roads, and so forth. And ultimately, the international stakeholders terminated the contract and said, if you are purchasing arms with the revenues, then this is not a development project anymore. And currently, Chad is in deep troubles and civil war, and so it deteriorated even more. As an example, that also projects can miserably fail. So the World Bank, European Investment Bank, all the engineers, everybody terminated the contract in a huge turmoil as a consequence of that one-sidedly Chad said, and they tried to get away with it, so their lawyers thought, well, we are allowed to indicate the priority sector, and well, let me think, today our priority is arms. And so they tried to argue that it is within the aim of the development targets, because hey, arms are also giving jobs to soldiers and morgues, but that obviously miserably failed in the context of the applicable law, given the considerations that obviously priority sectors are schools, hospitals, and the like.
Didn't other actors took Chad to court?
Well, yes, but that was ultimately stopped because Chad somehow repaid the sort of funds that were already given to them, and it was such a mess that the World Bank and other stakeholders decided not to further bother. And on the internet you can see 100 reports of all these stakeholders, how terrible this project was ultimately. So, not to show you a quasi-successful project in Laos, but also one that was not successful. On this case, the corporate structure. Here we see one state, Cameroon, another state, Chad. We see the corporate investors, so the foreign direct investors, Exxon, Petronas, Chevron, so American oil companies. And this is a sort of alternative of the other drawing, where you ultimately point out with or without percentages who is shareholder and the like. Here you see of this project the finances. So you see that we see equity financing and debt financing. Equity financing being the companies and the state investing their own money to be owner, shareholder of the operating company. So that is this. And you see the debt financing, which is a large a larger amount. And so 800 million and 1.4 billion, total of $2 billion. And these are then the typical loans connected to the project as in the other example. And here you see the government borrowing. So the total that was borrowed by the state of Chad, the state of Cameroon, and the collective borrowing. And so Chad borrowed 56 and Cameroon 83 on the total of 2 billion. And so that explains why they sort of could repay their debt to get the World Bank off their neck, because there was some oil getting through the pipeline ultimately. I believe it's now broken down, I don't know for sure, but it doesn't function as it was intended to function. And then here are, just before the break, the two clauses that deal with this termination. So if your contract party decides to non-perform on that clause, invest the revenues in priority sectors, and is not building hospitals and schools, there are two things you can do. One, suspension by the World Bank. So you can suspend your obligation to allow the borrower to draw on the loan. Remember the schedule? So in January you get 100, and in February you get the next 200, and in March you get the next 500, because you need the money in the course of time. It takes them 3 years to build such a thing. And so each period you need money. So suspension means that you're not allowing the borrower to get more money. So you freeze the debt arrangement. That's one. And two, events of acceleration. If all the money is already given, so if the non-performance is in a later stage, and they already got all the money, then termination means I am not allowing you to take another 30 years to repay. I want you to start repaying tomorrow. Then you accelerate the obligation to repay the debt. That is why it is called events of acceleration. These are part of the World Bank General Terms and Conditions. And these are applicable, another 600 pages, by the simple clause in the main contract. On this contract, the General Terms and Conditions apply. That is exactly the same what you do in a phone company when you purchase a new smartphone. Then there's one page you sign, and the last clause says all your rights and obligations are partly codified in the General Terms and Conditions, which you hereby accept.
But interestingly enough, that sometimes, and that's just a telephone example, or even the German, if the General Terms and Conditions do not meet up with the law, then those General Terms and Conditions are suspended.
Yeah. So the contribution is that in the EU, and to a lesser extent in the USA, certain general terms and conditions might be subject to further scrutiny in the context of those poor consumers and those terrible telephone, airline, and electricity providers. And only in that context, in the EU, and to a lesser extent in the USA, general terms and conditions are suspicious. But apart from that, in the business-to-business world, in EU and the USA and all over the globe, it's just a contract drafting technique. So you make one big document, 500 pages in typeface 12, and you make another 600 pages you call General Terms and Conditions typeface 10, and you make sure that both are applicable by 2 signatures. And then the whole idea is that you're not negotiating with Chad and Cameroon on your general terms and conditions. You say, take it or leave it. So that is the difference.